The ancient world was fundamentally shaped by four great river civilizations, each rising from the fertile mud of the planet's greenest valleys to rewrite the trajectory of human organization. In the vast, sun-drenched plains of the Near East, Mesopotamia rose along the unpredictable, twin torrents of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Far to the east, the earliest dynasties of China emerged from the sweeping bends of the Yellow River. In the fertile floodplains of South Asia, the sophisticated Indus Valley civilization developed beside its own great namesake. But among all these ancient titans of human ingenuity, only one single civilization possessed the extraordinary structural resilience to last for more than 3,000 continuous, uninterrupted years as a unified cultural powerhouse: Egypt on the Nile. What was the secret that made ancient Egypt so remarkably resilient across the vast ledger of human history? How did it manage to outlast nearly every other civilization of the classical world, maintaining its core identity through devastating floods, systemic famines, foreign invasions, and brutal centuries of external military occupations? Today, in this comprehensive and detailed documentary chronicle, we are going to chart the entire epic history of ancient Egypt, tracking its course from the very first prehistoric farmers who settled beside the Nile's fertile banks to Cleopatra's fateful, tragic alliance with the rising imperial power of Rome. This is not a superficial journey about grand pyramids, golden treasures, and silent mummies. It is an exploration of cultural endurance, a deep dive into understanding how a society maintained its sacred core identity for over 30 centuries without fracturing into oblivion. Long before the first grand pyramids cast their long shadows across the burning desert sands, or divine pharaohs claimed an absolute, God-given right to rule the entire land, prehistoric Egypt was already taking its first quiet steps toward eternity. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence. Breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The monumental story begins around 10,000 years before the Common Era, during a fascinating ecological epoch when the harsh, unforgiving North African climate was actually significantly wetter, greener, and more hospitable than the desert landscape we see today. The vast expanse that modern minds picture exclusively as the shifting dunes of the Sahara was then a beautiful land of sprawling savannas, seasonal lakes, and abundant wildlife. The early inhabitants of this region lived not as settled farmers, but as highly adaptable, nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving meticulously across the plains to follow the seasonal migrations of wild game and to gather native plants. These early Egyptians left behind tantalizing, permanent clues to their daily existence, scattering finely crafted stone tools across ancient lake beds that have long since dried up, and decorating remote rock shelters with vibrant, stylized images of giraffes, elephants, and river-dwelling hippopotamuses, animals that have been completely extinct in North Africa for millennia. As the global climate gradually shifted and became relentlessly drier, around 7,000 years before the Common Era, the ancient savannas began to wither away, turning the green landscape into an unyielding desert. Out of sheer ecological necessity, these scattered nomadic groups were forced to abandon the drying plains and congregate along the narrow valley of the Nile River, where fresh water remained incredibly plentiful all year round. This forced migration marked one of humanity's most significant and permanent transitions: the historical shift from hunting and gathering to settled, localized agriculture. Along the life-giving banks of the river, these early farmers slowly learned to cultivate native barley and emmer wheat, domesticated wild cattle, sheep, and goats, and established the very first permanent agricultural villages of the Nile Valley. The Nile River itself quickly shaped every single aspect of early Egyptian life, culture, and religion. Unlike other ancient river civilizations, such as those in Mesopotamia or China, which faced highly unpredictable, catastrophic, and destructive flooding that routinely wiped out entire cities, the Nile's annual inundation occurred with an extraordinary, near miraculous regularity. Every single summer, fed continuously by the massive monsoon rains in the high Ethiopian mountains far to the south, the river would rise gently, spreading its waters across the wide floodplain and depositing a thick, mineral-rich layer of dark silt. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, meaning the Black Land, in direct honor of this exceptionally fertile soil, which supported abundant, predictable crops, season after season. The incredible predictability of this natural cycle gave the early Egyptians a profound, unyielding sense of cosmic order and balance. They came to believe that the universe was not governed by chaotic, angry gods, but by a structured, harmonious rhythm that would later manifest as the ultimate foundation of their entire religious, legal, and philosophical system. As these early communities grew more permanent and prosperous, they established increasingly complex burial practices that hint at highly sophisticated, emerging beliefs about death, preservation, and the mystery of the afterlife. At Nabta Playa, situated deep in the sun-scorched desert of southern Egypt, Stone Age people constructed one of the world's very oldest astronomical observatories, around 5,000 years before the Common Era, erecting a circle of massive megaliths specifically designed to track the summer solstices and spring equinoxes. This monumental achievement demonstrated an advanced, early understanding of celestial movements and the passage of time, an intellectual legacy that would eventually become central to later pharaonic religious thought. Material culture flourished rapidly as these villages grew larger, more stable, and structurally complex. Distinctive pottery traditions emerged along the river, with the beautiful, black-topped redware pottery of Upper Egypt becoming particularly characteristic of the era. Early craftspeople worked with an increasingly diverse array of natural materials, meticulously carving bone, precious ivory, and semi-precious stones, and eventually mastering the basic principles of copper metallurgy to forge stronger tools. The earliest preserved Egyptian figurines from this prehistoric era reveal a rapidly growing artistic tradition, with stylized representations of animals, fertility figures, and eventually human forms becoming noticeably more sophisticated, elegant, and standardized over the passing generations. Clear evidence of a structured social hierarchy first appeared as these agricultural communities grew larger and expanded their territory. By 4,500 years before the Common Era, certain graves within ancient cemeteries contained noticeably more elaborate luxury goods, imported jewelry, and fine weapons than others, suggesting the definite emergence of elite social classes who commanded greater economic resources and held political authority over the community. These early social distinctions would eventually lead directly to the formation of powerful regional chiefdoms and proto-kingdoms during the late prehistoric period. The people of prehistoric Egypt were never isolated from the wider world. Detailed archaeological evidence reveals extensive, long-distance trade networks reaching deep into the Levant, the rich lands of Nubia to the south, and even the distant coast of the Red Sea. Copper from the mines of Sinai, gold from the mountains of Nubia, and exotic shells from the Mediterranean all found their way into these early Egyptian river communities, demonstrating the existence of highly sophisticated commercial exchange networks thousands of years before the first formal international diplomacy was ever written down. By 4,000 years before the Common Era, distinct and robust regional cultures had fully crystallized along the geographic axis of the Nile River. In the north, within the marshy expanses of the Nile Delta, the Mahdi culture developed an open, cosmopolitan society, maintaining close commercial connections with the Levant through overland caravan routes. Concurrently, in southern Egypt, the Badarian and later Nakata cultures created increasingly complex, stratified societies. The Nakata culture, named after its expansive archaeological type site near modern Luxor, was characterized by an aggressive vitality. Over the passing centuries, its political and cultural influence began to expand steadily northward, systematically absorbing other regional traditions and laying the critical socio-political groundwork for Egypt's eventual national unification. In the final centuries of the prehistoric era, the competitive pressure between expanding communities intensified, causing powerful proto-states to condense along the river valley. Archaeological excavations at sites like Hierakonpolis reveal the sudden existence of large, heavily walled towns equipped with monumental administrative buildings, specialized craft workshops, and clear evidence of an institutionalized division of labor. At the sacred site of Abydos, elaborate elite tombs filled with high-status goods and proto-hieroglyphic tags suggest the presence of powerful regional rulers who commanded substantial human labor and material resources. These heavily fortified proto-states, each fiercely controlling strategic sections of the Nile Valley and its trade routes, were the immediate political predecessors to the unified Egyptian nation-state. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence. Breathe deeply and let our journey begin. From these fragmented, competing proto-states emerged perhaps the most consequential and enduring political event of the ancient world. A grand unification so structurally profound that its sacred symbols would still adorn royal regalia 3,000 years later. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, precisely as advanced bronze tools were beginning to spread through the city-states of Mesopotamia, and the very earliest stone structures of Stonehenge were being raised in Western Europe, King Narmer accomplished what had previously seemed impossible. The fierce warrior ruler from Upper Egypt, the southern region of the river, launched a massive, decisive military campaign that successfully conquered Lower Egypt in the north, forging the world's very first territorial nation-state under a single, supreme authority. The dramatic story of this momentous political unification survives most vividly through the world-famous Narmer palette, a ceremonial cosmetic slab masterfully carved from solid siltstone. This remarkable artifact tells a calculated, highly sophisticated visual story across its two sides. On one face, Narmer is depicted wearing the tall white crown of Upper Egypt, dynamically striking down a kneeling northern foe with a heavy mace. On the reverse side, he is shown wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, proudly walking in a triumphal procession to inspect rows of bound, decapitated enemies. The Narmer palette does not merely commemorate a passing military victory. It establishes an entirely new, standardized visual language of sovereign kingship that would persist throughout Egyptian history, making it the very first example of state-sponsored propaganda and historical narrative art. The true political genius of Narmer's historic unification was not simply found in his raw military conquest, but in how he seamlessly legitimized his new centralized rule over a divided populace. Rather than merely treating Lower Egypt as a conquered, subjugated territory, he skillfully positioned himself as the rightful, protective ruler of both distinct regions, creating a balanced, dual identity that became the permanent theological foundation for all future Egyptian kingship. This brilliant innovation in political theology gave birth to the concept of the king, not merely as a secular warlord, but as an earthly ruler who functioned as a vital, divine mediator between humanity and the gods. This set the unyielding institutional framework for what would later evolve into the majestic pharaonic system. Building upon this need for geopolitical centrality, the exact geographic midpoint between Upper and Lower Egypt became the natural strategic choice for the new capital city of Memphis. This location beautifully symbolized the political, economic, and cultural convergence of Egypt's two distinct halves. Archaeological evidence suggests that Narmer likely founded the original settlement as a fortified stronghold known as Inabu Hedge, meaning the White Walls, with successive kings continuously expanding it into a sprawling administrative and religious metropolis that would serve as the beating heart of Egypt's imperial government for 8 consecutive centuries. The visual symbolism of national unification extended deeply into every piece of the royal regalia. The most iconic symbol became the magnificent double crown, known as the pshent, which physically and elegantly nested the white crown of Upper Egypt within the red crown of Lower Egypt. When worn by the king, these previously competing symbols created a powerful, undeniable visual metaphor for the absolute unity of the state. Similarly, the royal titular architecture began systematically incorporating dual natural elements. The sedge plant, symbolizing the landscape of Upper Egypt, and the honeybee, representing the delta of Lower Egypt, became standard prefixes to every royal name. Interestingly, despite our modern, automatic association of ancient Egyptian rulers with the title of pharaoh, this specific term would not actually enter regular historical usage until over 1,000 years after Narmer's initial unification. During the early dynastic period, the ruler was strictly known by highly specific titles like He of the Two Ladies or the Jewel King, continuously emphasizing his legal role as the unifier of separate lands. The English word pharaoh, which is derived from the native Egyptian term per-ar, meaning the Great House, originally referred explicitly to the physical royal palace complex and its administrative apparatus, rather than to the person of the king himself. Beyond these profound symbolic changes, national unification acted as a massive catalyst for practical, systemic innovations necessary for governing a vast, continuous territory. The immediate need to efficiently administer a unified state accelerated the development of hieroglyphic writing, with some of the earliest known examples of formal scripts dating precisely to this administrative transition. Standardized weights and measurement systems, centralized tax collection networks, and highly organized state religious cults all emerged as practical solutions to the immense challenges of ruling the newly expanded kingdom. Pottery styles and artistic conventions that had previously varied wildly by region began to rapidly homogenize, creating a cohesive, national cultural identity. This extraordinary transformation from competing regional factions into a single territorial state represents one of history's most successful examples of nation-building, creating a resilient structure that would maintain its essential identity for 3 millennia. Narmer's successor kings inherited far more than just a unified geographic territory along the banks of the Nile. They faced the monumental, unprecedented task of inventing an entire system of national governance from scratch. As the initial dust of military conquest settled, Egypt entered what modern scholars categorize as the early dynastic period, spanning approximately from 3100 to 2686 years before the Common Era, encompassing the first 2 ruling dynasties of the new state. These pioneering, experimental rulers systematically transformed Narmer's raw military achievement into something far more enduring and structural, a functioning, centralized civilization equipped with distinctive cultural, religious, and administrative practices that could survive the death of any individual leader. The strategic city of Memphis quickly became the administrative heart of this expanding nation, positioned perfectly at the ecological junction of Upper and Lower Egypt to control both regional tax revenues and trade routes. Under the direct patronage of these early dynastic kings, the rudimentary writing systems of the prehistoric era became rapidly refined, evolving from isolated symbolic tags into a practical, highly flexible tool for state governance and economic accounting. It was during this administrative evolution that royal names began appearing enclosed within distinct rectangular frames known as sereks, which were the structural architectural forerunners to the famous oval cartouches that would later become synonymous worldwide with Egyptian royalty. These early hieroglyphics reveal a system designed explicitly for practical statecraft, resource tracking, and political messaging rather than the expression of romantic literature. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The dramatic evolution of royal burial practices during this foundational period offers perhaps the most striking, raw window into the nature of early dynastic society and the consolidation of absolute power. At the ancestral desert site of Abydos, modern archaeologists have uncovered massive, subterranean royal tomb complexes, surrounded by long, meticulously organized rows of smaller subsidiary burials. Initial scientific excavations of these secondary graves revealed something deeply unsettling to modern sensibilities. These subsidiary tombs contained the physical remains of young court officials, royal servants, concubines, and master craftspeople who had been systematically sacrificed at the exact moment of the king's death to accompany their sovereign into the eternal afterlife. The massive royal tomb of King Jer, one of the primary rulers of the First Dynasty, was found to contain the skeletal remains of nearly 600 sacrificed retainers, all laid to rest in a single, coordinated event. This dark practice of retainer sacrifice, which would be utterly and completely abandoned by later, more mature Egyptian dynasties, demonstrates how the emerging, experimental concept of divine kingship was utilized to justify the most extreme measures to cement absolute psychological and political control over the population. To effectively manage their rapidly expanding territorial borders, these early dynastic kings divided the entire length of Egypt into distinct administrative regions called nomes, each overseen by a provincial governor, known technically as a nomarch. This nome system created Egypt's very first formal bureaucratic structure, allowing the central treasury in Memphis to effectively execute census counts, enforce taxation, and manage valuable agricultural resources across the newly unified land. Remarkably, this foundational provincial framework proved to be so structurally sound that it would endure as the primary unit of local administration for thousands of years, long outlasting individual dynasties and foreign conquests. This period also witnessed the careful crystallization of a national religious ideology that portrayed the king not merely as a mortal ruler, but as a living divine presence on earth, whose health and proper performance of sacred rituals were directly linked to the fertility of the soil and the stability of the state. Architectural innovations during this era heralded the monumental developments of the future. The traditional mud brick mastaba tombs, rectangular, flat-roofed structures with sloping sides covering deep underground burial chambers, grew increasingly elaborate, massive, and highly decorated with intricate palace facade motifs. Toward the end of the Second Dynasty, some royal tomb structures began incorporating heavy, precisely carved stone elements, foreshadowing the revolutionary, all-stone monuments that would define the next great era of Egyptian history. These early experiments with heavy stone construction represented a significant technological and logistical leap forward, requiring the development of entirely new masonry skills, quarrying tools, and large-scale labor organizational capabilities. The early dynastic period, however, was far from an era of unbroken domestic peace. Material evidence and fragmentary inscriptions suggest ongoing, bitter tensions between competing regional power centers along the river, particularly during the troubled Second Dynasty, when inscriptions hint at deep religious and political conflicts concerning the rival state gods, Horus and Seth. The final king of the Second Dynasty, Khafre, appears to have successfully reunified Egypt by force after a prolonged period of internal civil strife, a triumph explicitly suggested by his chosen royal name, which translates beautifully to the two powers appear, and his unprecedented, strategic decision to incorporate both the falcon of Horus and the creature of Seth atop his royal serek. Artistically, the master craftsman of the early dynastic courts successfully established the precise aesthetic conventions that would define Egyptian art for thousands of years. The distinctive profile view of human figures, hierarchical scaling to indicate social importance, and the rigid grid system for proportional representation. Early masterpieces, such as the exquisite ivory figure of King Den, depicted in a dynamic running pose, already display the incredible sophistication, confidence, and maturity that would characterize Egyptian artistic production for centuries to come, laying the structural groundwork for the majestic dawn of the Old Kingdom. The monumental story of how Egypt transformed into one of history's greatest and most structurally awe-inspiring civilizations enters a deeply revolutionary chapter with the rise of the Third Dynasty. Around 2686 years before the Common Era, as the visionary King Djoser ascended the grand throne in Memphis, the kingdom stood at the precipice of an extraordinary cultural and technological evolution. The relatively modest mud brick world of the early dynastic period was about to expand into something entirely unprecedented, a highly organized, centralized society capable of mobilizing immense physical resources to construct stone monuments that would remain completely unrivaled for millennia to come. King Djoser's soaring ambitions permanently changed the course of human organization when he commissioned his brilliant chief vizier, Imhotep, to design and construct his eternal resting place in the desert. Breaking drastically from centuries of royal tradition that relied exclusively on perishable mud brick mastabas, Imhotep engineered what history remembers as the Step Pyramid Complex at Saqqara, a revolutionary leap in both architectural scale and construction material. Rising over 204 feet into the clear desert sky across 6 distinct, tiered stone levels, this massive structure required the quarrying, transport, and precise placement of approximately 850,000 tons of solid limestone, marking humanity's very first successful attempt at monumental stone architecture. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The immense psychological and political impact of this architectural achievement on the ancient population cannot be overstated. Before the reign of Djoser, even the most elaborate royal tombs remained fundamentally impermanent, vulnerable structures built from organic materials that would eventually erode, decay, and dissolve back into the desert sands. The Step Pyramid permanently proclaimed something entirely new to the world, that the sovereign king's divine power transcended time, nature, and mortality itself. As the bright morning sun caught the polished white limestone casing stones, the massive structure would have appeared to literally glow on the western horizon, a permanent, shining manifestation of royal divinity visible for miles across the crowded agricultural communities of the Nile Valley. The vast complex surrounding the pyramid reveals the sophisticated spatial understanding and symbolic precision of Imhotep's architectural design. Enclosed entirely by a massive, beautifully decorated limestone wall, stretching 1,640 feet long and 900 feet wide, the ceremonial courtyard contained numerous ritual structures, including the sacred Hebsed festival court. It was here that the living king would periodically perform physical endurance rituals, running a precise course before his assembled courts to publicly prove his continued physical fitness and divine capability to rule the land. Remarkably, these ceremonial structures, while initially built in perishable materials like wood, bundled reeds, and woven mats in earlier generations, were brilliantly and meticulously translated by Imhotep into permanent, solid stone, demonstrating stone's potential as a flexible, highly decorative building material. Imhotep's immense genius extended far beyond the realm of architectural engineering. As Djoser's chief minister, master of the royal archives, and high priest of the creator god Ptah, he embodied the ultimate Egyptian ideal of the polymath. His comprehensive, deep knowledge encompassed medicine, astronomy, advanced mathematical calculation, and profound state theology. Such was his lasting, unparalleled reputation for wisdom, that centuries after his death, he achieved something almost entirely impossible for a commoner in rigid Egyptian society: absolute deification without a single drop of royal blood. By the late period, ordinary Egyptians worshipped him as a literal god of healing and wisdom, with thousands of sick pilgrims traveling from distant provinces to his sacred sanctuaries, seeking miraculous cures for their afflictions. The Old Kingdom witnessed the full, magnificent flowering of the concept of divine kingship as the primary organizing principle of society. While earlier dynastic rulers had merely associated themselves with regional deities, Old Kingdom pharaohs were now understood to be the direct, living manifestations of the sky god Horus in life, and seamlessly unified with Osiris, the lord of the underworld, after death. This powerful theological framework positioned the king as the single, essential intermediary between humanity and the divine realm, the absolute political linchpin that maintained cosmic order. This cosmic order centered entirely on the profound, all-encompassing concept of Ma'at, often symbolized in art as a delicate ostrich feather or a seated goddess wearing that feather. Far more than a simple legal definition of truth or human justice, Ma'at represented the fundamental, fragile harmony of the entire universe, including the predictable flooding of the river, the movement of the stars, and the stability of society. When the Old Kingdom pharaohs claimed to live and rule by Ma'at, they asserted their active role as the ultimate protectors of this universal stability. The king's proper, daily performance of sacred temple rituals, his continuous maintenance of state sanctuaries, and his fierce defense of Egypt's borders against chaotic outside forces were considered absolutely essential to preventing the entire world from falling back into the darkness of primordial chaos. To efficiently execute this divine mandate across the realm, Old Kingdom rulers developed what may have been the world's very first complex, merit-based bureaucracy. A highly sophisticated administrative system emerged, characterized by specialized titles, hereditary offices, and rigorous training. The institutional hierarchy extended seamlessly from the office of the vizier down through regional overseers, local scribes, grain accountants, and tax collectors. Monuments from this period proudly record grand administrative titles like Overseer of all the King's Works and Keeper of the Royal Archives, describing a complex, heavily layered governmental apparatus that employed thousands of professional administrators across the length of the Nile Valley, binding the independent nomes tightly to the central will of the throne in Memphis. While Imhotep's step pyramid revolutionized the structural landscape of early Egyptian architecture, the monumental achievements that followed would completely dwarf it in both staggering physical scale and breathtaking mathematical precision. How could a civilization, operating entirely without modern mechanical tools, advanced iron equipment, or sophisticated computing systems, create stone structures so perfectly aligned to the stars that their base coordinates deviate from true geodetic north by less than 1/60th of a single degree? The ultimate answer to this mystery lies in the rise of the glorious Fourth Dynasty, spanning from approximately 2613 to 2494 years before the Common Era, when royal pyramid construction officially reached its historic zenith under the absolute rule of the pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Their monumental tombs raised at the Giza Plateau represent the absolute pinnacle of ancient Egyptian engineering, long-distance logistics, and state organizational capacity. Khufu's Great Pyramid, the premier wonder of the ancient world, initially stood an astonishing 146 meters tall, containing approximately 2,300,000 individual stone blocks, weighing anywhere between 2.5 and 15 tons each. The mathematical precision embedded within this artificial mountain is genuinely staggering. The massive base forms an almost perfect square, with the lengths of its four sides differing by mere centimeters, despite spanning a distance of more than 230 meters. The complex construction process involved a massive, highly structured network of specialized workers that looks profoundly different from what most people imagine today. Contrary to decades of popular Hollywood depictions and historical myths, these eternal monuments were absolutely not built by millions of brutalized, whipped foreign slaves, but by rotating, highly organized teams of skilled Egyptian laborers and craftsmen. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence. Breathe deeply and let our journey begin. These permanent teams of professional stonecutters and engineers were supplemented by seasonal agricultural workers during the annual Nile flood, when the rising waters completely covered their farm fields, rendering agricultural labor temporarily impossible. Archaeological excavations at the nearby workers' villages have uncovered extensive material evidence of well-fed, highly respected laborers who regularly received professional medical care, including successful bone settings, and were organized into competitive, fiercely loyal work units with playful, proud names. Graffiti discovered, scrawled inside the unfinished, deep interior chambers of the pyramids, includes proud monikers like the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure, demonstrating a strong sense of community and shared purpose among the builders. These massive state projects required an unprecedented standard of complex logistical coordination across the entire country. Special inland harbors were meticulously constructed along the banks of the Nile to receive fine white limestone transported from the quarries of Tura and heavy granite blocks shipped from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away up the river. Soft copper tools had to be constantly recast and resharpened by smiths as they rapidly wore down against the hard stone surfaces. Food production had to be dramatically increased across all nomes to systematically feed the massive workforce, and specialized artisans were continuously needed to create the intricate interior burial chambers, grand galleries, and hidden escape passages. The entire enterprise functions as history's very first large-scale, state-organized infrastructure project, made possible exclusively by Egypt's highly sophisticated, literate bureaucracy. Beyond their obvious architectural magnificence, the pyramids served as sophisticated cosmic machinery within ancient Egyptian religious thought. The long, straight interior passages were precisely aligned to specific circumpolar stars, those that never set in the night sky, which the Egyptians beautifully called the imperishable ones, linking the pharaoh's destiny directly to eternity. Other shafts pointed toward Orion's belt, a constellation closely associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection. The pyramid shape itself represented the primordial mound, the Ben-Ben, from which all creation originally emerged, and functioned as a physical metaphor for the sun's golden rays descending to earth, forming a celestial staircase. These monuments were far more than simple stone tombs. They were cosmic launch pads, explicitly designed to rocket the deceased pharaoh to his rightful place among the immortal gods. Inside Khufu's Great Pyramid, the king's chamber contains peculiar, advanced engineering features that still puzzle modern architects, including narrow, precisely cut air shafts that do not actually ventilate the room, but instead function as symbolic pathways to the ancient Egyptian sky. The massive red granite sarcophagus housed within this chamber was actually too large to have been brought in through the existing narrow passages after the pyramid's completion, meaning it was meticulously placed there during the initial construction phase. Undeniable material evidence of the careful, advanced planning these projects required years in advance. The deeper social implications of pyramid building were truly profound for the development of the nation. These massive state enterprises permanently reinforced the pharaoh's godlike power by demonstrating his absolute ability to marshal vast resources and human labor on a scale never before witnessed in human history. Yet, paradoxically, they also fostered a powerful sense of unified national identity and collective purpose, uniting thousands of citizens from completely separate, distant provinces in a shared national enterprise that transcended local tribal affiliations. The highly specialized technical knowledge developed during construction, running from advanced astronomy and masonry to structural engineering, practical mathematics, and complex project management, created a brilliant intellectual legacy that would influence and sustain Egyptian civilization for millennia to come, setting a gold standard for the future. After the glorious passing of the Fourth Dynasty, pyramid construction across the Nile Valley continued for generations, but it never again reached the same colossal, jaw-dropping scale or near-flawless structural precision. The ambitious pharaohs of the Fifth Dynasty purposefully chose to construct smaller, less physically demanding pyramids, opting instead to divert their state revenues and manpower toward building grand sun temples dedicated to the solar deity, Ra. By the arrival of the Sixth Dynasty, the structural quality of royal stone construction declined even further, mirroring a slow, dangerous decay in central royal authority. The Great Golden Age of monumental pyramid building had lasted for only a few brief generations, yet it represented ancient Egypt operating at its most unified, powerful, and impeccably organized state. While this diminishing physical scale of royal monuments masked a profound socio-political transformation taking place within the fabric of Egyptian society, the theoretical concept of divine kingship initially expanded. The pharaoh stood at the absolute apex of a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored theological system that presented him as the single, essential guarantor of universal harmony. Every single morning, when the pharaoh awoke within his palace, the sun rose across the sky, not merely by cosmic coincidence, but because the king, as the earthly manifestation of the divine, performed the necessary, sacred rituals to ensure the continuation of creation. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The physical manifestations of this royal power became increasingly complex, stylized, and rigid. The pharaoh was rarely seen by his subjects without his full symbolic regalia, the curved crook, representing his paternal role as the protective shepherd of his people, the flail, symbolizing his absolute, unyielding authority to punish wrongdoers and enforce the law, and the distinctive Nemes headdress, with its striped cloth framing his face like a lion's mane. These were not simply decorative elements designed for palace luxury, but visual theology made physical, transforming a mortal human king into an instantly recognizable divine icon, whose very presence reinforced the supernatural status of the state. Throughout the temple walls, across the length of Egypt, a curious artistic motif appeared with remarkable consistency. Scenes of the pharaoh violently striking down, cowering foreign enemies with a mace. What makes these smiting scenes particularly fascinating to modern historians is that many of them were carved during prolonged periods of deep international peace, when no actual military campaigns were underway. These images functioned as powerful, magical protection ritual acts frozen forever in stone, where the pharaoh was depicted perpetually defeating the chaotic forces of disorder to maintain universal mart. The terrified enemy figures under his mace were not necessarily historical opponents, but personifications of cosmic chaos itself. However, the growing complexity of national authority necessitated a dangerous expansion of the administrative apparatus. The office of the vizier evolved over time into the most powerful, influential, non-royal position in the kingdom. Often drawn from elite families or directly from the king's own immediate relatives, the vizier oversaw the administration of justice, the execution of the national census, and tax collection across all nomes. Every single morning, the vizier would meet with the pharaoh to discuss the complex affairs of state before carrying the royal will throughout the massive bureaucracy. In the king's physical absence, the vizier's authority across the land was near absolute, making him indispensable to governance, yet always subordinate to the institution of divine kingship. The economic dimensions of this pharaonic power also expanded dramatically through the development of the state temple system. Massive temple complexes were far from simple houses of localized worship. They operated as massive economic powerhouses that controlled vast agricultural estates, specialized artisan workshops, and immense forced labor forces. Historical records show that by the height of the kingdom, temple domains collectively controlled a massive portion of Egypt's arable land. Each donation the pharaoh made to a regional temple, whether land, cattle, or precious metals, strengthened both divine and royal authority by creating local centers of production and economic distribution tied directly to pharaonic legitimacy. The solar cult of Ra gained unprecedented prominence during this transition, with pharaohs systematically incorporating the formal title Son of Ra into their official names. This divine sonship was far from a metaphorical honorific. In Egyptian theological terms, it was a literal reality. The king was believed to be physically generated by the sun god's divine essence, infused into the queen mother through supernatural means. Each pharaoh thus functioned as a living manifestation of cosmic power, connecting the day-to-day survival of Egypt directly to the eternal rhythms of the universe. Yet, all the divine power that flowed through the pharaohs could not prevent what came next, a political and ecological collapse so deep that it challenged the very foundation of Egyptian cosmology. What force could possibly topple a civilization where absolute kings commanded the sun to rise and maintained universal order through their mere physical existence? The answer lies in a perfect storm that state theology had never prepared them for. Around 2200 years before the Common Era, climate records reveal a severe, abrupt, drying trend across Northeast Africa and the Middle East, a catastrophic event that environmental historians call the 4-2 kiloyear event. The Nile River, Egypt's eternal lifeline, began behaving unpredictably, with years of exceptionally low floods creating widespread agricultural devastation that the centralized state in Memphis was completely powerless to address. These environmental catastrophes struck directly at the psychological heart of pharaonic legitimacy. If the king truly controlled the cosmic forces of nature, why were the fields barren, the irrigation channels dry, and the state granaries empty? As harvests failed year after year, the carefully constructed administrative apparatus began to crumble from within. Tax revenues plummeted while food prices soared, creating a catastrophic fiscal crisis. The vast bureaucracy that had once directed pyramid construction could no longer be maintained. More significantly, the ideology of divine kingship suffered a devastating blow. How could the common people trust a living God who could not deliver the most basic necessity of life, food? Detailed archaeological evidence, excavated from provincial cemeteries, tells a revealing story of this transition. The nomarchs, who had once served merely as humble extensions of royal authority in the provinces, began styling themselves as independent, absolute rulers. Their tomb inscriptions no longer emphasized loyalty to the distant pharaoh in Memphis, but instead highlighted their own independent achievements in saving their local populations from starvation. One provincial governor, named Anktifi, proudly proclaimed himself the great overlord of his nome, boasting openly on his tomb walls, "I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. I brought life to the provinces when the sky was clouded and the earth was parched with thirst." Such independent declarations would have been completely unthinkable during the height of Old Kingdom power, when only the pharaoh could claim credit for Egypt's prosperity. This rapid decentralization created a political domino effect across the country. As local nomarchs gained absolute independence, they redirected local tax revenues away from the capital. Memphis, once the beating heart of Egypt's administrative network, rapidly lost all influence over the distant provinces. Reduced revenues meant the pharaoh could no longer commission monuments or maintain extensive temple staffs, further eroding his practical authority. Pepi II, the last significant ruler of the 6th dynasty, embodied this painful decline. Traditional historical sources claim he ruled for an astonishing 94 years, a prolonged reign that modern scholars believe contributed heavily to national instability. As he aged, real power diffused among competing factions at court, while distant provinces slipped further from central control. By the end of his long reign, Egypt had transformed from a unified kingdom into a chaotic collection of autonomous territories, with only nominal allegiance to the throne. The weakening of central authority allowed regional religious practices to flourish independently, with local temple complexes dedicated to provincial deities gaining immense political prominence, directly challenging the royal cults that had dominated Old Kingdom religion. The cosmic powers, once channeled exclusively through the person of the pharaoh, were now fractured and dispersed among a multitude of local cults and ambitious priesthoods. Physical evidence of this systemic decline appears clearly in royal funerary practices. The magnificent pyramids that had once symbolized Old Kingdom splendor gave way to modest, poorly constructed structures built with inferior mud brick materials and hasty craftsmanship. The last royal pyramid of the Old Kingdom, belonging to Pepi II, shows a markedly reduced scale and quality compared to its predecessors. After his death, even these diminished monuments became impossible to sustain for the bankrupt state. By 2160 years before the Common Era, central authority had disintegrated entirely. The United Kingdom fractured into competing territories ruled by rival provincial dynasties. Memphis lost its status as the sole capital of the nation, with rival centers of power emerging at Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt and the city of Thebes in the Deep South, ushering in the chaotic era known to history as the First Intermediate Period. While Memphis faded from its former glory, two highly ambitious cities prepared to battle fiercely for the fractured soul of a divided Egypt. Between Heracleopolis in the north and the rising city of Thebes in the Deep South lay not just a significant geographical distance, but fundamentally different visions for what the nation could become after the old divine kingship model had failed so spectacularly. During this fragmented era, lasting from approximately 2160 to 2055 years before the Common Era, Egypt experienced something completely unexpected, a profound cultural renaissance flourishing amid intense political chaos. The total collapse of centralized authority created a vast open space for regional innovation, free from the rigid artistic constraints previously dictated by royal palace artisans in Memphis. Local artisan workshops developed their own distinctive, expressive styles, which modern archaeologists have uncovered at sites like Mawala and Gebeline. These provincial tombs display a bold experimentation with new motifs, energetic compositions, and vibrant colors that would have been strictly prohibited under the Old Kingdom standardization. The Northern Kingdom, centered securely at Heracleopolis, was founded by a fierce leader named Keti I, who established the 9th dynasty around 2160 years before the Common Era. His successive lineage controlled the exceptionally fertile Nile Delta region and parts of Middle Egypt, giving them direct access to lucrative Mediterranean maritime trade networks. These northern rulers actively legitimized their authority by emphasizing their practical role as protectors against rampant banditry, cross-border incursions, and lawlessness, a pressing concern in a time of widespread food shortages. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The Southern Kingdom, based at the remote city of Thebes, grew gradually under the guidance of local governors who eventually declared their absolute independence, establishing the 11th dynasty. These fiercely independent Theban rulers held strategic access to the rich gold mines of the eastern desert and vital overland trade routes leading into Nubia, providing them with critical economic resources to fund their growing military ambitions. Early Theban kings, such as Intef I and Intef II, systematically expanded their territorial control northward, directly challenging Heracleopolitan dominion over Middle Egypt. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period is how rulers were structurally forced to justify their authority through concrete human action rather than relying blindly on inherited divine right. Tomb inscriptions from this fragmented era are remarkably candid, detailing a leader's specific achievements. "I gave bread to the hungry and clothes to the naked," boasts one provincial governor's autobiography. This direct language reveals the birth of a brand new social contract, where a leader's ability to protect, feed, and provide for the population, rather than his supposed divine lineage, earned him true loyalty. This political fragmentation also sparked a brilliant literary explosion across the land, producing Egypt's very first works of political commentary, deep philosophy, and social criticism. The famous text known as the Instruction for King Merikare, composed by a dying Heracleopolitan king for his son, offers remarkably practical advice on statecraft. "Be skilled in speech, so that you may be strong. Speech is stronger than any weapon." Rather than claiming divine infallibility, these new texts openly acknowledge the immense psychological and practical challenges of governing in uncertain times. The text known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer presents an even more striking, radical departure from traditional Egyptian optimism. This remarkable document depicts a world completely overturned by social upheaval, stating, "The poor man is full of joy, the wealthy man is sorrowful. He who never built for himself now owns cattle." While some modern scholars interpret this text as a literal reaction to actual social revolutions, others see it as a cautionary tale designed to warn future generations against the terrifying consequences of abandoning traditional social hierarchies. Archaeology reveals that provincial elites flourished during this long period of reduced central control. Tombs excavated at Asyut and Beni Hassan showcase elaborate interior decorations, fine jewelry, and complex funerary equipment that, in many cases, surpass the quality of contemporary royal burials. Local governors constructed impressive rock-cut tombs directly into the cliffs, adorned with detailed scenes of hunting, fishing, and agricultural abundance, displays of independent wealth that would have been politically impossible under a strong, centralized pharaonic court. This period of fragmentation created a unique, unprecedented window of opportunity for social mobility along the Nile. Tomb biographies from this era frequently describe self-made individuals who rose from humble beginnings to positions of high administrative authority based purely on personal competence and merit, rather than noble birth. The first intermediate period, while politically chaotic and fragmented, allowed human talent to surface in ways the rigid, frozen hierarchy of the Old Kingdom had previously prevented. After nearly a century of division, the brilliant Theban king Mentuhotep II began a highly coordinated, successful military campaign of national reunification around 2,055 years before the Common Era. Through a series of strategic military victories and carefully arranged political marriages with provincial elite families. Mentuhotep II gradually extended Theban control northward until the entire country was once again brought under a single crown. His historic victory was permanently commemorated in his highly innovative mortuary complex constructed at Deir el-Bahari. This architectural masterpiece combined traditional pyramid elements with brand new terrace structures, perfectly reflecting Egypt's changed cultural and political landscape. From the smoking ashes of the first intermediate period emerged not a simple restoration of the old, frozen ways, but something entirely revolutionary. While history remembers Mentuhotep II as Egypt's second great unifier, what is often overlooked is how his triumph fundamentally rewrote the unyielding contract between the ruler and the ruled, a transformation that would echo through the valley for the next 1,000 years. After securing final military victory, Mentuhotep II faced the formidable challenge of healing a deeply fractured society. The newly reunified kingdom required an entirely new governing philosophy to bind the wound of civil war. Unlike the distant Old Kingdom pharaohs who had ruled from the isolated northern capital of Memphis, the Middle Kingdom rulers permanently established their primary power center at Thebes, signaling a dramatic shift in Egypt's political geography. This was far from a simple change of administrative address. It represented a complete, systemic recalibration of Egyptian culture, religion, and national governance. The rise of Thebes brought profound, permanent religious changes across the realm, as the local deity Amun, previously a minor god of the wind, began an extraordinary theological ascent that would eventually transform him into Amun-Ra, the supreme king of the gods. Royal propaganda skillfully merged this Theban deity with older solar traditions, creating essential theological continuity while establishing an unyielding foundation for the new lineage. Mentuhotep II's chosen coronation name, Nebupetra, meaning Lord of the Rudder, is Ra, explicitly connected his earthly rule to solar theology while maintaining distinctly southern, Theban roots. Middle Kingdom rulers systematically revolutionized the relationship between the pharaoh and his subjects. Royal inscriptions and courtly literature from this period reveal a remarkable shift in how kingship was conceptualized and framed to the public. The famous literary masterpiece, known as The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, presents a profound narrative where even a common, poor farmer could stand before a royal magistrate and demand absolute justice from the administrative system based on the universal laws of fairness. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. This new ideal of accessible, ethical kingship was captured in numerous instructional texts, advising rulers to speak Ma'at and do Ma'at, suggesting that divine order was no longer simply enforced from above through terrifying power, but actively performed through righteous, compassionate governance. Monumental architecture directly reflected this massive political and philosophical transformation. Mentuhotep II's mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari represents a magnificent architectural turning point in human engineering. A spectacular structure built directly into the towering limestone cliffs that combined elements of traditional, isolated pyramids with open, colonnaded terraces. This innovative design incorporated both upper and lower Egyptian artistic elements, visually representing national reunification while establishing a brand new architectural language that would inspire later monuments for centuries. The national administrative system underwent a complete, rigorous reorganization. The Middle Kingdom introduced highly specialized civil titles and offices, with particular emphasis placed on tightly monitoring provincial administration to prevent the local nomarchs from amassing dangerous levels of independent power. The post of overseer of sealed things, essentially the royal chancellor, became exceptionally important in managing Egypt's revitalized international trade networks. Surviving administrative papyri reveal sophisticated, daily record-keeping systems, tracking everything from agricultural production indices and tax assessments down to the exact logistics of military expedition personnel. Economic recovery demanded aggressive, state-sponsored expansionism beyond the natural borders of the Nile. The pharaohs dispatched heavy military expeditions southward, establishing a massive chain of sophisticated mud-brick fortresses along the Nubian frontier at strategic locations like Buhen, Kuma, and Semna. These were not merely defensive military outposts. They operated as heavily garrisoned commercial trading hubs that strictly controlled the crucial trade routes accessing sub-Saharan Africa's immense raw resources. The Middle Kingdom saw a massive renewal of mining operations in the turquoise mines of the Sinai Peninsula, alongside royal trading expeditions to the exotic, legendary land of Punt, located likely near modern Somalia. Imperial ships returned from these long voyages, laden with rare myrrh trees, heavy elephant ivory, and exotic animals for the royal courts. Significant military innovation accompanied this territorial expansion. Middle Kingdom armies introduced advanced composite bows, improved body armor, and the devastating khopesh, a curved sickle sword designed for close-quarters combat. The period's literature includes highly detailed tactical texts describing ideal battlefield formations, troop movements, and complex siege strategies, revealing a newly professionalized, highly trained military establishment. Literature blossomed brilliantly during this cultural renaissance, producing some of ancient Egypt's most enduring, celebrated masterpieces. Deeply philosophical wisdom texts, like the instructions of Amenemhat, coexisted with high adventure tales like the story of the shipwrecked sailor, and deeply contemplative works, like the dialogue of a man with his bar, about the complex psychological nature of life and death. These texts reveal a highly literate, mature society engaged in profound cultural self-reflection, actively questioning traditional old assumptions about authority, mortality, and human meaning. Artistic conventions also underwent a dramatic, naturalistic transformation. Middle Kingdom sculpture intentionally abandoned the stiff, idealized perfection of Old Kingdom models, introducing naturalistic, human elements into royal portraiture. Statues of these pharaohs featured furrowed brows, deeply lined faces, heavy eyelids, and down-turned mouths, expressions suggesting an inner psychological state of weariness and care. This artistic breakthrough reflects a profound shift in how kingship was conceptualized, no longer just a divine, carefree entitlement, but a serious, bone-deep responsibility requiring immense wisdom, daily effort, and constant vigilance over the welfare of the people. These naturalistic portraits, revealing the burden of leadership, were a powerful political statement, showing a ruler who watched over the citizens with absolute devotion, keeping the forces of chaos at bay. The 12th dynasty, stretching from approximately 1991 to 1802 years before the Common Era, brought Egypt to completely unprecedented heights of administrative efficiency, engineering capability, and cultural sophistication. The dynasty's brilliant founder, Amenemhat I, established clear, unyielding patterns of centralized governance that his successors would spend nearly 2 centuries perfecting. Under his guidance, the throne passed smoothly from father to son, with remarkable consistency, a stark contrast to the fragmentation that had plagued earlier periods. Under Senusret I, Egypt's second ruler of the dynasty, the kingdom embarked on a massive, ambitious building program that dotted the entire length of the Nile Valley with permanent stone monuments. This pharaoh commissioned temples from the marshy delta down to the rocky Nubian frontier, including significant expansions at Karnak, where he erected massive granite pillars and established the sacred foundations that would support Egypt's most holy temple complex for centuries to come. However, the Fayum region witnessed the dynasty's most impressive, historically significant engineering achievements. This massive natural depression, located southwest of Memphis, had been mostly an unlivable swampy marshland for millennia. The 12th dynasty pharaohs, particularly Amenemhat III, transformed this entire landscape through a highly complex network of deep canals, massive stone dikes, and underground irrigation systems. The absolute centerpiece of this hydrological project was the successful creation of Lake Moeris, an enormous artificial reservoir designed to capture excess floodwaters from the Nile and safely release them during the dry seasons. This ancient engineering marvel effectively extended Egypt's agricultural capacity by thousands of acres, supporting rapid population growth and generating a massive agricultural surplus that funded further state expansion, forever changing the economic map of the country. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. In the realm of aggressive foreign policy, Senusret III emerged as the dynasty's most formidable military strategist. Unlike the territorial expansion campaigns of the later New Kingdom pharaohs, Senusret's Nubian expeditions aimed strictly to secure Egypt's long-term economic interests, specifically protecting the rich gold mines and trade routes of the south. His brilliant strategy involved a sophisticated combination of psychological, military intimidation, and immense infrastructure development, exemplified by a continuous series of massive mud brick fortresses constructed at regular intervals along the Nubian frontier. These fortresses represented military engineering on an entirely unprecedented scale. Sites like Uranati, Buhen, and Shalfak featured massive double walls up to 10 meters thick, deep defensive ditches, and purpose-built barracks capable of housing hundreds of professional soldiers. But they were far from purely military installations. They functioned seamlessly as administrative centers equipped with scribal workshops, massive granaries, and bureaucratic offices that meticulously managed the flow of trade goods between Egypt and its southern neighbors. The cultural achievements of the 12th dynasty were equally impressive. Court artists developed a highly distinctive, moving style that captured the true psychological weight of kingship. Statues of Senusret III, with their furrowed brows, heavy eyelids, and downturned mouths, reveal a ruler who deeply understood the crushing burden of his position. This artistic breakthrough suggests a profound shift in how kingship was conceptualized, no longer just a divine entitlement, but a serious responsibility requiring immense wisdom, daily effort, and constant vigilance. Legal innovations also transformed Egyptian society during this golden age. Standardized legal procedures developed rapidly, with clear evidence surviving in papyri of formalized protocols for land transfers, inheritance disputes, and criminal proceedings. The role of judges became increasingly specialized, and local courts operated with standardized methods across the kingdom. The 12th dynasty pharaohs successfully built a government structure remarkable for its time, creating a perfect balance between central authority and regional administration. Provincial governors remained powerful within their nomes, but were continuously checked by royal overseers who reported directly to the vizier in the capital. This sophisticated system of checks and balances allowed the national bureaucracy to function with flawless efficiency, while completely preventing the local independence that had undermined earlier dynasties. For all its remarkable historic achievements, however, the Middle Kingdom rested on foundations far more fragile than its stone monuments suggested. The very systems that had elevated Egypt to unprecedented heights contained hidden vulnerabilities that, when systematically exploited, would usher in an era so chaotic that later generations of Egyptians would attempt to erase it entirely from their official historical records. The slow twilight of the 13th dynasty marked the beginning of the end for this golden age. Unlike the strong, unbroken hereditary succession of the 12th dynasty, these later rulers occupied the throne for increasingly shorter periods, with some reigning for mere months before being replaced. This rapid turnover created a catastrophic administrative instability that rippled throughout the entire kingdom. With each new pharaoh came major, sudden shifts in policy and court personnel, gradually undermining the massive bureaucratic machine that had maintained the nation's economic balance. As central authority weakened in the capital, Egypt's borders became increasingly porous, leaving the country vulnerable to infiltration. The Delta region, always Egypt's most geographically exposed and vulnerable frontier, soon saw a gradual, unchecked infiltration of Canaanite peoples arriving from the Levant, setting the stage for a total collapse. The newcomers moving into the Delta region were not initially part of a conquering army. They were families of immigrants and traders from the Levant, seeking opportunities in Egypt's still prosperous northern lands. They settled in bustling trading hubs like Avaris, slowly integrating into local communities while maintaining their cultural and kinship connections to the Levant. The final collapse of the Middle Kingdom administrative framework came around 1650 years before the Common Era. A group of these Asiatic settlers, known to the native Egyptians as the Hyksos, a term translating directly to rulers of foreign lands, successfully established political control over the entire Delta region. Under their first major leader, King Seleucus, they declared themselves the rightful 15th dynasty of Egypt, controlling the richest agricultural lands of the country and relegating the native Egyptian rulers to a subordinate, vulnerable status. What makes the Hyksos takeover particularly fascinating to modern historians is that it resembled a corporate merger, far more than a hostile, bloody military invasion. Detailed archaeological excavations at Avaris reveal a sprawling city where distinctly Levantine architecture, religious shrines, and burial customs existed seamlessly alongside traditional Egyptian elements. Royal seals and scarabs show that the Hyksos kings fully adopted traditional Egyptian pharaonic titles, artistic conventions, and religious iconography, while proudly maintaining their foreign names and cultural distinctiveness. They did not seek to destroy Egyptian civilization, they sought to rule it. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence. Breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. However, the military innovations the Hyksos brought with them from the Levant permanently transformed the nature of warfare in North Africa. Having originated in the highly militarized zones of the Near East, the Hyksos introduced horse-drawn chariots equipped with lightweight, spoked wheels designed for extreme speed and battlefield maneuverability. These mobile combat platforms allowed highly trained archers to rain arrows down upon dense infantry formations before swiftly retreating out of range, a devastating tactical advantage that the native Egyptian military had never encountered. The Hyksos also brought vastly superior metallurgy to the Nile Valley, producing heavy bronze weapons, scale armor, and composite bows that were significantly stronger and more durable than anything existing in Egypt's traditional arsenal. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt, particularly at the southern city of Thebes, native Egyptian dynasties managed to maintain a fragile, precarious independence. The archaeological record shows that these 17th dynasty rulers gradually swallowed their pride, adopting and copying the Hyksos military innovations, while slowly cultivating a powerful, nationalistic narrative of resistance against foreign domination. Tombs from this transitional period reveal a striking, split duality. They are traditionally Egyptian in their religious texts and funerary layout, yet they increasingly incorporate foreign bronze weapons, horse gear, and aggressive military imagery into their decorations. What makes this second intermediate period particularly difficult for modern scholars to reconstruct with absolute precision is the near-total scarcity of official, centralized state documentation. The meticulous, daily administrative papyri that characterized the Middle Kingdom virtually disappear from the archaeological record, replaced by fragmented private inscriptions. Historians must piece together the narrative of this chaotic era from private tomb biographies, scattered scarabs, and later, New Kingdom accounts that are heavily colored by intense nationalistic sentiment and anti-Hyksos propaganda. Even determining the exact sequence and length of reigns during this period remains a subject of fierce debate among global Egyptologists. The Hyksos period was far from a dark age of unmitigated foreign oppression and destruction, as later pharaonic propagandists would loudly claim. Cultural and technological exchange flowed dynamically in both directions along the river. The Hyksos rulers adopted Egyptian scribal practices, utilized the native bureaucratic framework to collect taxes, and worshipped traditional Egyptian deities. They specifically elevated the god Seth, transforming him into a state patron because they associated his chaotic nature with their own ancient storm god, Baal. Religious texts and administrative techniques from this era show innovative combinations that would heavily influence the administrative machinery of the future. After nearly a century of divided rule, the underlying political tensions between the native Egyptian court at Thebes and the Hyksos capital at Avaris escalated into an open, brutal war of liberation. The preserved mummy of the Theban king Seqenenretau tells a violent, graphic story of this transition. His skull bears multiple horrific, unhealed wounds from Hyksos-style battle axes and daggers, proving that he died in close-quarters combat against the northern forces. His eldest son, Kamose, continued the bitter struggle, leaving behind a famous victory stela at Karnak that perfectly captures the fierce, nationalistic fervor of the Theban resistance, famously demanding, "Why do I contemplate my strength while there is a ruler in Avaris and another in Kush, and I sit united with an Asiatic and a Nubian, each man holding his slice of Egypt?" The historical stage was now set for a total explosion of military power that would drive out the foreigners and give birth to the glorious Egyptian empire. The glorious New Kingdom began not with a quiet, diplomatic compromise, but with a resounding, total military victory that would permanently alter Egypt's long-term geopolitical destiny. After nearly a century of divided sovereignty and foreign administrative control under the Hyksos, Ahmose I, a highly determined and battle-hardened Theban prince, launched a relentless, coordinated campaign to fully reclaim Egypt's absolute independence and national dignity. Following directly in the tragic footsteps of his warrior father, Seqenenretau, and his older brother, Kamose, both of whom had lost their lives fighting the northern occupiers, Ahmose I finally succeeded in driving the foreign rulers completely from Egyptian soil around 1550 years before the Common Era, reunifying the fractured nation and establishing the illustrious 18th dynasty. This historic victory represented far more than a simple liberation of occupied territory. It fundamentally and permanently transformed Egypt's collective worldview. The bitter, lingering memories of humiliating foreign domination left an indelible, deep psychological mark on the Egyptian consciousness, creating a lasting, unyielding determination to prevent such national vulnerability from ever happening again. The once insular, the defensive kingdom now aggressively adopted a highly proactive military posture, pushing its borders outward to create massive buffer zones and secure its strategic frontiers against potential future threats. Egypt was no longer content with its historical, splendid isolation behind the desert barriers. It now sought to control its own destiny by dominating neighboring lands and controlling international trade routes. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The massive military machine that made this aggressive territorial expansion possible underwent a complete, systemic revolution in both battlefield tactics and administrative organization. The Egyptians, ironically, learned everything from their former Hyksos rulers, rapidly adopting, refining, and improving upon their advanced military innovations. The horse-drawn chariot became the absolute centerpiece of the new Egyptian army, operating as a highly mobile, lightning-fast platform from which elite archers could rain specialized arrows down upon enemy infantry formations before executing a swift, coordinated retreat. Military careers quickly became highly prestigious pathways to immense wealth and political power within the state, with successful generals regularly rewarded by the pharaoh with vast agrarian estates, captured slaves, and immense political influence at court. The state army itself transformed into a permanent, highly professional standing institution rather than an ad hoc, seasonal militia raised exclusively for specific, short campaigns. The southern city of Thebes remained the spiritual, emotional, and administrative heart of this revitalized Egypt, its supreme importance reinforced by massive, state-sponsored construction projects that loudly celebrated the victories of the new dynasty. But the true, practical power behind the throne increasingly rested with the wealthy priesthood of Amun, who had financially and ideologically supported the Theban royal family during their long, bloody struggle against the northern Hyksos. In deep gratitude for their spiritual backing, Ahmose I and his royal successors lavished unprecedented wealth, expansive tracts of land, and political authority upon Amun's sacred temples, rapidly elevating this once minor, regional deity to unprecedented national prominence. The deliberate theological merging of Amun with the ancient solar god Ra created Amun-Ra, the supreme king of the gods, whose earthly representatives, the pharaohs, wielded immense, unquestioned political and economic power over the population. The economic engine that successfully fueled this brand new imperial age ran continuously on the highly productive gold mines of Nubia, the immense annual tribute extracted from conquered peoples, and the rapid reopening of ancient international trade routes that had been severely disrupted during the Second Intermediate Period. Ahmose I not only rebuilt what had been physically destroyed during the War of Liberation, but massively expanded Egypt's core infrastructure, commissioning new stone quarries and funding grand trading expeditions to secure the luxury goods that the elite classes craved. High-quality stone, valuable timber, and exotic materials flowed back into Egypt in quantities never before witnessed in history, enabling a massive, competitive construction boom that would permanently reshape the architectural landscape of the entire Nile Valley. Military conquest alone, however, did not secure Egypt's new dominant position in the ancient world. Sophisticated diplomatic marriages, formal international treaties, and the careful, strategic placement of loyal Egyptian administrators created a complex, highly effective network of relationships that bound foreign territories tightly to Egyptian economic interests. The young children of conquered foreign rulers were routinely brought back to Egypt to receive a high-class courtly education, a thinly veiled, highly sophisticated form of honored hostage-taking that effectively ensured their parents' continued political loyalty, while simultaneously exposing the next generation of international leaders to the superiority of Egyptian culture, language, and values. The vibrant court culture that rapidly developed during this period deeply reflected Egypt's brand new cosmopolitan character. Foreign influences in art, architectural style, language, and high fashion became highly prestigious status symbols among the elite, rather than being xenophobically rejected as they had been in the past. The royal family and the high nobility eagerly embraced certain aspects of international luxury style, while meticulously maintaining distinctly Egyptian religious practices temple rituals, and traditional royal iconography. This cultural flowering, born directly out of military liberation, would soon reach its absolute peak in the successive, brilliant reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, when ancient Egyptian art, architecture, and imperial administration achieved completely new heights of refinement, expression, and global domination. This pragmatic adaptation of international ideas and military technologies soon yielded geopolitical dividends far beyond anything Egypt's early rulers could have ever imagined. At its absolute imperial height, the Egyptian empire stretched over 2,000 miles from north to south, creating a vast network of vassal states that sent a steady, glittering stream of raw resources, precious metals, and exotic goods directly into the pharaoh's central treasury. The ambitious rulers of the 18th dynasty transformed what had originally begun as a defensive, post-liberation buffer strategy into an unprecedented, highly offensive imperial machine that dictated terms to the entire Near East. Thutmose I pushed Egypt's boundaries further than any previous ruler, campaigning deep into Syria and establishing a formal frontier at the Euphrates River. This remarkable expansion was permanently commemorated when he erected a massive victory stela beside the riverbanks, proudly declaring Egypt's northeastern boundaries to the modern world. But it was his brilliant grandson, Thutmose III, who truly earned his enduring historical reputation as ancient Egypt's greatest military leader, a tactical genius whom modern historians frequently call the Napoleon of Egypt. Taking sole control of the throne after the death of his stepmother, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III conducted an astonishing 17 military campaigns over the course of 20 years, systematically subduing rebellious territories from the deserts of Sudan all the way to the rugged kingdoms of northern Syria. His most celebrated, strategically brilliant victory occurred at the historic Battle of Megiddo, where he faced a massive, hostile coalition of rebellious Canaanite princes who had gathered their forces to challenge Egyptian sovereignty over the region. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. When his cautious generals strongly advised taking one of the open, safe routes around the mountains to avoid a trap, Thutmose III boldly rejected their fears, declaring to his council, "I shall go on this narrow road of Megiddo. If you really love me, follow me." Leading his forces personally through a dangerously narrow, rocky mountain pass, where the soldiers had to walk in single file, he caught the enemy coalition completely by surprise. Emerging directly onto the plain before the city walls, the Egyptian army launched a fierce, coordinated chariot charge that scattered the enemy forces in total terror, forcing them to flee their camps and seek refuge inside the fortifications. The grueling siege of Megiddo that followed lasted for 7 long months, ending with the total submission of numerous rebellious city-states, who threw open their gates to the king. The Egyptian military machine became increasingly sophisticated, professionalized, and specialized under these warrior pharaohs. Beyond the devastating tactical use of horse-drawn chariots, they employed highly organized, permanent divisions of elite archers, heavy infantry, and specialized desert scouts. Amenhotep II, the son and successor of Thutmose III, proudly boasted in royal inscriptions of his own martial prowess, claiming he could shoot arrows cleanly through thick copper targets while driving a heavy chariot at full speed. Whether these larger-than-life tales were historically true or exaggerated state propaganda, they successfully reinforced the terrifying image of the pharaoh as an invincible warrior king who protected his people from the chaotic forces of the outside world. Perhaps most remarkable was the complex, highly efficient administrative infrastructure that supported this imperial dominion across distant lands. Egypt established garrison towns throughout its conquered territories, each equipped with military commanders, tax collectors, and diplomatic representatives. Local rulers who submitted to Egyptian authority were allowed to maintain their land and local titles, provided they paid heavy annual taxes and sent their eldest heirs to Egypt for their education, a highly sophisticated form of honored hostage-taking that ensured international compliance. This system of indirect rule allowed the pharaohs to control vast territories with minimal manpower. The official records of these magnificent triumphs were meticulously documented by court scribes. On the massive stone walls of the Karnak temple, Thutmose III commissioned the famous annals, which are highly detailed, blow-by-blow accounts of his campaigns, including precise inventories of plunder taken from the enemy, 924 chariots, over 2,000 horses, thousands of captured foreign nobles, and enormous quantities of gold, silver, and precious stones. These stone carvings were not mere boasts. They served as powerful political and magical tools, demonstrating to all visitors the divine mandate of the pharaoh to maintain universal ma'at through military supremacy. This imperial success story permanently transformed the internal fabric of Egyptian society itself. Foreign goods rapidly became prestigious status symbols among the elite classes, with Minoan-inspired frescoes adorning the walls of royal palaces, Levantine jewelry appearing in noble tombs, and exotic foods gracing the tables of the wealthy. Ancient Canaanite gods, like Baal and Astarte, were peacefully incorporated into Egyptian religious practices, and even the hieroglyphic language absorbed hundreds of loan words from its subject peoples, particularly military, equestrian, and trade terminology. The empire also created a new, influential class of officials with international experience and multilingual skills. Royal messengers traveled continuously between the great courts of the ancient world, carrying diplomatic correspondence, while Egyptian spies, disguised as international merchants, gathered intelligence on potential threats. The famous Amarna letters, an extraordinary archive of clay tablets discovered by archaeologists, reveal a highly sophisticated network of international relationships, alliances, and gift exchanges between Egypt and the other great powers of the age, including the Hittites, Mitanni, Assyrians, and Babylonians, proving that Egypt stood at the absolute center of global diplomacy and imperial power. Among those legendary pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, who expanded Egypt's monuments and left an unyielding mark on history, one ruler stands entirely apart, not for launching bloody military triumphs across distant lands, but for shattering ancient gender barriers that had defined Egyptian kingship for 1,000 years. When King Thutmose II died unexpectedly around 1479 years before the Common Era, no one in the royal court could have possibly predicted that his young widow would transform herself from a traditional queen regent into Egypt's most economically successful female pharaoh. She was a sovereign whose exceptional legacy would prove so deeply threatening to the exclusive male nature of the throne that future kings would systematically attempt to chisel her very existence from the stone records of history. Hatshepsut began her reign conventionally enough, serving as the protective queen regent for her young stepson, the infant King Thutmose III, who was too young to effectively govern the realm. But within a few brief years of managing the state bureaucracy from Memphis and Thebes, she took an unprecedented, radical political step. She formally declared herself the absolute king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This was far more than a simple modification of her courtly title. Hatshepsut systematically and brilliantly rewrote the rigid, centuries-old rules of Egyptian kingship, commissioning royal statues that explicitly showed her in the traditional male regalia, complete with the curved pharaonic kilt, the sovereign double crown, and even the false ceremonial beard traditionally worn by kings, while proudly maintaining her grammatical identity as a woman in many of her written inscriptions. In some artistic depictions, she intentionally appears with a highly stylized, masculine physique to emphasize her political power, while in others, her delicate feminine features remain clearly visible beneath the heavy, royal symbols of state. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The complex, sophisticated political maneuvering behind Hatshepsut's steady rise to absolute power reveals her profound diplomatic genius and deep understanding of human psychology. Rather than attempting to violently displace or overthrow the young Thutmose III entirely, which would have instantly triggered a bloody civil war among the military elite, she meticulously maintained him as her official, royal co-ruler, while gradually claiming the primary, executive authority over the state apparatus. To secure her crown, she masterfully won over the absolute loyalty of high court officials, particularly an incredibly talented man named Senenmut. He rose from humble, provincial origins to become her chief royal architect, high steward, and arguably her closest confidant and advisor. Her political power base extended deeply into the highly influential priesthood of Amun at Thebes, whose sprawling temple sanctuaries she expanded with massive donations of gold, land, and captive slaves, ensuring their divine endorsement of her unconventional rule. Hatshepsut's long reign stands out uniquely in the history of the New Kingdom for deliberately prioritizing international economic prosperity, domestic restoration, and trade infrastructure over aggressive, bloody military expansion. While her male predecessors and successors measured their ultimate greatness in battlefield body counts, shattered city walls, and plundered provinces, she focused her administration's immense energy on rebuilding Egypt's fractured international trading networks, which had remained largely dormant since the chaotic days of the Hyksos occupation. Her most famous, celebrated diplomatic achievement was a massive, state-sponsored maritime expedition to the legendary exotic land of Punt, located along the southern coast of the Red Sea. This historic voyage was beautifully immortalized in extraordinary, highly detailed stone reliefs carved into the walls of her mortuary temple. These vibrant carvings show large Egyptian ships returning to the docks of Thebes, laden to capacity with rare, living myrrh trees, high-quality frankincense, heavy bars of pure gold, rare elephant ivory, fine ebony wood, and exotic wild animals, including baboons and panthers. The legendary Punt expedition was far more than a simple commercial success. It was a total masterpiece of calculated political theatre, publicly displaying Egypt's massive economic reach and Hatshepsut's absolute ability to acquire exotic luxury goods to delight the gods without spilling a single drop of Egyptian blood on a battlefield. Architecturally, Hatshepsut permanently transformed the landscape of the ancient capital. Her crowning achievement, her magnificent mortuary temple constructed at Deir el-Bahari, represents one of ancient Egypt's most innovative, breathtaking architectural designs. Built directly into the towering, vertical limestone cliffs opposite Thebes, its elegant, multi-tiered terrace structure with long, colonnaded facades creates a perfect, harmonious dialogue between rigid human architectural precision and the raw majesty of the natural landscape. The sprawling temple served multiple vital functions. It was a permanent monument to the prosperity of her reign, a grand venue for her personal mortuary cult, and a piece of powerful political propaganda demonstrating her divine legitimacy as pharaoh. To solidify her controversial claim to the throne before her subjects, Hatshepsut employed religious theology with remarkable, cutting-edge sophistication. She commissioned elaborate, detailed reliefs on her temple walls, explicitly depicting her own divine conception and birth. The sacred story claimed that the supreme creator god, Amun-Ra, had taken the physical form of her mortal father, Thutmose I, and visited her royal mother, Queen Ahmose, in her palace, making Hatshepsut not merely royally born, but divinely conceived from the gods. This origin story beautifully elevated her claim to rule far above the messy realm of human court politics into the sphere of cosmic inevitability. She also emphasized her profound daily role in maintaining Ma'at by restoring ancient monuments that had fallen into decay, reopening historical trade routes, and celebrating religious festivals with an unprecedented, staggering magnificence. For approximately 22 glorious years, Hatshepsut ruled over a completely peaceful, stable, and incredibly wealthy Egypt. Yet shortly after her death, her young stepson and successor, Thutmose III, now ruling alone as an absolute warrior king, began a systematic, highly coordinated campaign to erase her name from official state history. Her sacred cartouches were chiseled from temple walls. Her beautiful statues were toppled and smashed into quarries, and her great achievements were reassigned to her male ancestors. This attempted eraser was not an act of personal, petty revenge. It was a cold, calculated administrative program designed to restore the exclusively male nature of Egyptian kingship that Hatshepsut had so effectively challenged and rewritten, ensuring that the historical timeline conformed to traditional cosmology. Part 14. Akhenaten, the Heretic King, and the Amarna Revolution. Ancient Egyptian history features remarkably few true revolutionaries, as the entire weight of pharaonic civilization was geared toward maintaining cosmic equilibrium and repeating the perfect patterns of the past. But the radical pharaoh, who would come to be known to history as Akhenaten, took an ideological approach so destructive that it shattered Egypt's foundational religious system entirely, creating a profound cultural shockwave that future generations would do everything within their power to pretend had never happened. While earlier rulers like Hatshepsut had carefully challenged social and political traditions within existing theological frameworks, Amenhotep IV actively chose to rip the existing divine fabric apart. Born around 1380 years before the Common Era, during the absolute economic peak of the 18th dynasty, Amenhotep IV initially inherited a global empire that ran smoothly on foreign tribute and centralized administration. For the first 4 years of his conventional reign from the traditional capital of Thebes, he ruled as his ancestors had, honoring the supreme god Amun-Ra and enriching the powerful priesthoods. However, in his 5th regnal year, the young king underwent an absolute spiritual and psychological transformation that would alter the trajectory of Northeast African civilization. The massive traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods, Amun, Osiris, Isis, Anubis, and thousands of other localized deities who had governed daily life for over 1,000 years, was suddenly, unilaterally reduced to secondary status and then completely abolished. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. In their place, the pharaoh elevated a single, exclusive deity. The Aten, represented visually not as a human figure with an animal head, but as a pure, abstract solar disk whose descending rays ended in delicate human hands holding the Ankh, the symbol of life. This historic change was far from a simple personal preference or a shifting of royal patronage. It was the world's very first documented state-enforced monotheism. To permanently cement this religious revolution, Amenhotep IV took the radical step of legally changing his birth name to Akhenaten, meaning the effective spirit of the Aten, signaling an absolute, permanent break with his ancestral lineage. More dramatically still, he determined that the sacred city of Thebes was spiritually contaminated by the cult of Amun, leading him to completely abandon the ancient capital. He marched his entire royal court, his administrative bureaucracy, and thousands of confused citizens deep into the desert of Middle Egypt to establish a brand new, planned metropolis from scratch named Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of the Aten, located at the modern archaeological site of Amarna. This massive city rose from the virgin desert sands within just a few brief years, featuring open-air temple sanctuaries where the sun's burning rays could directly touch sacrificial altars, palaces built without roofs, and broad, geometric avenues, precisely aligned with the seasonal path of the sun. This radical revolution extended far beyond the realm of abstract theology, completely overturning ancient artistic conventions that had remained largely unchanged since the early dynastic period. Under Akhenaten's direct commands, the rigid grid system of idealized human proportions was cast aside, replaced instantly by an artistic style so strange and distinctive that modern archaeologists can recognize it at a single glance. In this Amarna art, human figures, particularly Akhenaten himself, were depicted with elongated skulls, distended stomachs, heavy feminine hips, thick sensuous lips, and thin, spindly limbs. Even more remarkably, the traditional, distant majesty of the divine god-king was abandoned. For the very first time in history, the pharaoh was shown in highly intimate, human family scenes, playfully kissing his infant daughters, holding hands with his wife, or simply relaxing within his private gardens, humanizing the monarchy in an unprecedented manner. Queen Nefertiti, whose famous name translates beautifully to "the beautiful one has come," functioned not merely as a passive royal consort, but as a genuine co-ruler who wielded immense political authority. Her iconic limestone bust, uncovered by archaeologists in 1912, reveals both her legendary aesthetic grace and her central position within the regime. In state temple reliefs, she is frequently depicted wearing her own unique, tall blue crown, actively executing the classic pharaonic stance of smiting foreign enemies' actions, historically reserved exclusively for male kings. While this intense religious revolution consumed the absolute focus and emotional energy of Akhenaten within his isolated desert capital, the vast international empire that his ancestors had fought and bled for began to rapidly crumble at its geographic edges. The famous Amarna letters, a treasure trove of cuneiform clay tablets discovered by local farmers within the royal archives, reveal increasingly desperate, frantic pleas from vassal kings in Syria and Canaan, begging the pharaoh for immediate military reinforcements against encroaching foreign invaders like the Hittites. Akhenaten's administrative response to these global crises was minimal. His surviving letters suggest he was profoundly preoccupied with perfecting solar temple rituals rather than maintaining international military power. Within the ancient borders of Egypt itself, the sweeping changes proved deeply unpopular and socially destabilizing. The powerful priesthood of Amun, once the wealthiest and most influential institution in the country, was effectively dismantled by royal decree, their sprawling temple estates closed, their enormous revenues confiscated by the crown, and the sacred name of Amun aggressively chiseled away from every monument across the land. The common people found themselves suddenly cut off from the comfortable, familiar gods who had governed their daily life, health, and childbirth for generations, plunging the internal psychology of the nation into profound anxiety and spiritual darkness. While Akhenaten's heretical name was destined to be systematically chiseled from the walls of history by a deeply resentful nation, his immediate blood successor would eventually become the most globally recognized figure in the entire ledger of world archaeology. Yet, this worldwide fame was earned not for any grand, sweeping, military triumphs achieved during his brief mortal life, but for a historical accident. The profound paradox of Tutankhamun lies in how his completely unremarkable, short reign produced history's most remarkably preserved archaeological discovery. In the chaotic, tense aftermath of Akhenaten's catastrophic religious revolution, Egypt found itself suddenly governed by a fragile child, a young boy of merely 9 years old, who originally bore the name Tutankhaten, reflecting his father's solar deity. Tutankhamun inherited far more than just a golden throne. He inherited a deeply traumatized kingdom, trapped in an absolute spiritual, economic, and geopolitical crisis. The senior court officials and military masterminds who truly held the reins of executive power behind the young boy, particularly the elderly Grand Vizier, I, and the battle-hardened military commander, Horemheb, fully recognized the urgent, desperate need to restore Egypt's traditional religious order before the fabric of society unraveled completely. These calculating men had carefully weathered the storm of the Amarna period, watching with growing horror as Egypt's international standing diminished, its vassals rebelled, and its domestic economy fractured. Now, with a highly malleable, young child ruler functioning as their perfect royal figurehead, they moved swiftly and decisively to undo the radical changes of the previous regime. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. The most significant political and administrative policy document of the Child King's brief reign was the famous Restoration Stela, a massive, public limestone proclamation erected at Thebes that painted a grim picture of Egypt under the previous monotheistic heresy. The temples and the cities of the gods and goddesses, from Elephantine down to the Delta marshes, had fallen into complete decay, and their sacred shrines were fallen into ruin, having become mere mounds of overgrown rubble, with weeds blowing through the courtyards, the stela loudly proclaimed. This official document represented far more than a simple administrative reform. It functioned as a vital theological correction, justifying the immediate return to ancient orthodoxy by explicitly describing how the traditional gods had completely abandoned Egypt, turning their backs on the nation during Akhenaten's solar heresy. Behind this royal decree stood the brilliant mind of I, Tutankhamun's primary vizier, and likely his maternal grandfather or great-uncle. I was a political chameleon who had successfully survived the dangerous Amarna period by enthusiastically adapting to Akhenaten's radical demands, while quietly maintaining his deep connections to the traditional elite. Now, with a child king under his direct guidance, A masterfully orchestrated Egypt's national religious revival. Alongside him, General Horemheb managed the state's military affairs, working tirelessly to rebuild Egypt's severely neglected international relations, fortify porous borders, and retrain the defensive capabilities of the chariot corps. The young king quickly changed his name to Tutankhamun, meaning the living image of Amun, signaling an absolute public return to the ancestral cult. He became the perfect vessel for national restoration. New construction projects at the Karnak temple showed the young Tutankhamun making elaborate offerings to Amun-Ra and other traditional deities, while highly skilled craftsmen were recalled from across the nomes to repair the thousands of damaged statues of the gods. Tutankhamun's royal cartouches began appearing on restored monuments throughout Egypt, symbolically reclaiming the land for Orthodox religion and asserting that Ma'at had successfully returned to the valley. Despite these frantic national efforts, Tutankhamun's actual physical control over state affairs remained profoundly limited throughout his short, painful life. Modern DNA analysis and scientific CT scans performed on his preserved mummy confirm that he suffered from multiple severe physical ailments, including a congenital clubfoot and necrosis in his bones that required him to use heavy walking sticks for daily mobility, a medical reality confirmed by the dozens of ornate, beautifully carved walking canes discovered inside his tomb. This biological analysis also revealed evidence of multiple severe malaria infections that may have ultimately weakened his already fragile, inbred constitution. These devastating health challenges, resulting directly from the royal family's strict practice of consanguineous marriages to preserve the purity of the solar line, severely limited his personal impact on national governance. When Tutankhamun died, completely unexpectedly, around the age of 18 or 19, he left behind no surviving heir to inherit the throne. His young widow, Queen Ankhesenamun, was placed in an exceptionally precarious, terrifying position at court. Intricate archaeological evidence and international diplomatic records suggest she may have written desperate, frantic letters to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, begging him to send one of his foreign sons to become her husband and king of Egypt, a remarkable, dangerous diplomatic gamble that ultimately failed when the Hittite prince was mysteriously murdered en route to the Egyptian border. Instead, the elderly vizier Ai stepped forward to assume the throne, marrying the young widow to legitimize his own royal claim before General Horemheb eventually succeeded him. These powerful military men would spend their subsequent reigns completing the total physical erasure of the Amarna period from official state history, completely omitting the names of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ay from the sacred king lists. Had history unfolded normally, Tutankhamun would have remained a completely forgotten, minor transitional figure in the grand lineage of Egypt. However, in November of 1922, Howard Carter's historic discovery of his nearly intact tomb within the Valley of the Kings transformed this minor, fragile boy into archaeology's greatest global celebrity. The spectacular funerary artifacts uncovered, including the iconic, solid gold death mask that has become the absolute universal symbol of ancient Egypt, revealed the incredible wealth and breathtaking artistry of the New Kingdom. The 5,398 meticulously catalogued items packed inside his tiny burial chamber provide modern humanity with its most comprehensive, spectacular window into the royal funeral practices and industrial capabilities of an empire that had successfully risen from the ashes of religious heresy to reclaim its eternal path. After Egypt's intensive religious restoration under the successors of the Amarna period, the expanding empire needed something far more than just a return to traditional orthodoxy. It required an absolute titan of a ruler, a leader whose legacy would be deeply carved not just into the white limestone of monumental temples, but into the permanent collective consciousness of human civilization. While many previous pharaohs had claimed divine status to justify their earthly rule, only one single sovereign would successfully blur the lines between man and God so flawlessly that 3,000 years later, the modern world would still know him simply and universally as the Great. Born into the pragmatic 19th dynasty around 1303 years before the Common Era, Ramesses II ascended the grand throne of Egypt in his early 20s, following the brief but highly effective military reign of his warrior father, Seti I. What followed was an entirely unprecedented, near-miraculous 66-year period of continuous absolute rule that would transform the architectural, physical, and cultural landscape of Northeast Africa forever. By the time of his eventual death at the remarkable, advanced age of 90, Ramesses II had fathered over 100 children with his numerous royal wives, lesser consorts, and palace concubines, effectively creating his own massive dynastic network within the state. This demographic explosion within the royal line ensured a stable, unbroken succession for generations, completely avoiding the internal power vacuums that had plagued the late 18th dynasty. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence. Breathe deeply and let our journey begin. The sheer physical scale of Ramesses II's structural ambitions remains almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. While earlier pharaohs had built highly impressive monuments scattered across the capital cities, Ramesses built on a scale that bordered on the obsessive, transforming the entire country into an architectural canvas for his own glorification. The spectacular cave temples of Abu Simbel, constructed deep in the rugged lands of southern Nubia, stand as perhaps his most extraordinary engineering achievement. These massive twin structures were carved directly into the living, solid sandstone cliffs overlooking the waters of the Nile. The main temple's grand entrance is flanked by 4 colossal, seated figures of Ramesses himself, each reaching an astonishing 66 feet in height, designed explicitly to intimidate travelers and foreign embassies entering Egypt from the south. Most ingeniously, the inner sanctum of Abu Simbel was engineered with flawless astronomical and mathematical precision, twice every single year, precisely on February 22nd and October 22nd, dates that modern scholars believe correspond directly to his royal coronation and birth. The rising sun penetrates the entire length of the dark cliff temple to illuminate the statues of Ramesses and the sun gods Amun-Ra and Ra-Harakti, intentionally leaving only the god of the underworld, Ptah, in darkness. Beyond Abu Simbel, Ramesses expanded or constructed over a dozen major temples, raised countless monolithic obelisks, and founded entirely new cities. His massive mortuary temple at western Thebes, the Ramesseum, contained a seated colossus weighing over 1,000 tons, a feat of heavy transport engineering that would challenge even modern construction capabilities. At Karnak and Luxor, massive columns and sprawling courtyards bore his name, while his brand-new capital city, Pi-Ramesses, located in the Delta, became one of the largest, most opulent metropolises in the ancient world, described in contemporary texts as sparkling like the horizon of heaven. While remembered primarily by modern tourists as a master builder, Ramesses II fiercely established his military reputation early in his reign. In the 5th year of his rule, he led an ambitious, highly aggressive campaign against the expanding Hittite Empire at the strategic city of Kadesh in modern Syria. Though the campaign nearly ended in total national disaster when Ramesses was completely separated from the bulk of his army due to false intelligence from Hittite spies, the pharaoh's massive state propaganda machine transformed the battle into Egypt's greatest triumph. According to the poem of Pentar, carved onto temple walls throughout the kingdom, Ramesses allegedly fought off thousands of enemy chariots single-handedly, calling upon the god Amun to infuse his arm with divine power until reinforcements arrived to break the Hittite siege. The actual battlefield reality was likely closer to a bloody, exhausting military stalemate. However, this prolonged geopolitical confrontation eventually led directly to the world's very first recorded international peace treaty in 1258 years before the Common Era, inscribed carefully in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Hittite cuneiform on silver tablets. This historic agreement established permanent borders, formed a defensive military alliance, and even created modern extradition policies between the two rival superpowers. The treaty proved so historically significant for human diplomacy that a prominent replica now hangs at the United Nations headquarters in New York as an ancient symbol of international statecraft. Ramesses' favorite queen, the beautiful Nefertari, received unprecedented honors during her lifetime and after her tragic death. Her spectacular tomb in the Valley of the Queens contains some of the most exquisite, well-preserved paintings ever created in antiquity, with vibrant colors still visible after more than 3 millennia. When she passed away, Ramesses commissioned a massive companion temple at Abu Simbel, specially dedicated to her memory and the goddess Hathor, a rare public monument to a queen's political and emotional significance. Perhaps most telling of Ramesses' calculating character was his widespread penchant for appropriating existing monuments. Throughout Egypt, older statues, columns, and buildings were deeply reinscribed with his personal royal cartouche, sometimes completely replacing the names of previous kings. This was far from mere personal vanity. It was a systematic, calculated program to ensure his immortality through omnipresence, rewriting national history to position himself forever at the center of Egypt's eternal narrative. The absolute immortality Ramesses II sought through stone proved remarkably successful across the generations, ensuring his name remained at the center of the human narrative. Yet, the vast empire he had fortified began to steadily and profoundly unravel almost immediately after his physical departure to the gods. The structural succession problems of the 19th dynasty began instantly, driven by the sheer longevity of the great king. Ramesses had outlived 12 of his eldest sons, meaning his 13th son, Merneptah, was already an old man in his late 60s when he finally took the crown. Though Merneptah ruled with remarkable vigor, successfully repelling massive Libyan invasions and recording his victories on the famous Israel Stela, which contains history's very first written reference to the people of Israel. His short reign marked the definitive beginning of Egypt's slow decline. The national power vacuum intensified dramatically after Merneptah's passing, leading to an unstable period of bitter succession disputes, short-lived reigns, and palace conspiracies. The dynasty that followed, the 20th dynasty, attempted to desperately recapture the fading glory of the past, with a succession of multiple rulers purposefully adopting the royal name of Ramesses in the hope of magically invoking the power and authority of their legendary predecessor. This march of Ramesses imitators, running from Ramesses III all the way through to Ramesses XI, represented increasingly desperate, theatrical attempts to maintain the superficial appearance of Egypt's former international grandeur, while its actual economic and political influence waned rapidly across the Near East. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. Among these successive rulers, Ramesses III stands out clearly as the very last truly effective, powerful pharaoh of the new kingdom. He ascended the throne at a time when the entire Eastern Mediterranean was collapsing into chaos due to the mysterious Late Bronze Age collapse. Around 1175 years before the Common Era, a massive, highly destructive confederation of displaced maritime raiders, known to history as the Sea Peoples, swept across the region, destroying the mighty Hittite Empire, burning the rich city-states of the Levant, and severing international trade networks. Ramesses III managed what nearly no other civilization of the age could. He fought them off and saved his country from total annihilation. The dramatic naval and land battle scenes recorded meticulously on the stone walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu show Egyptian archers firing dense volleys of arrows into collapsing enemy ships, while the pharaoh's disciplined infantry boxed in the invaders along the coast. The accompanying hieroglyphic text boasts proudly, "Those who reached my frontier, their seed is not. Their heart and soul are finished forever and ever." Yet, this magnificent military victory proved to be purely Pyrrhic for the state. The tremendous expenditure of resources completely drained Egypt's central treasury, and the civilization never fully recovered its international standing or its economic vitality. Severe domestic troubles followed, including the very first recorded labor strike in human history, when the highly skilled royal tomb workers at Deir el-Medina walked off their jobs after their state grain rations fell months behind due to bureaucratic corruption and financial insolvency. The end of Ramesses III proved to be just as troubled as his reign. In an event known historically as the Harem Conspiracy, a group of royal wives, high court officials, and priests plotted to violently assassinate the aging king to place a minor prince upon the throne. Modern scientific CT scans performed on Ramesses III's mummy revealed a deep, fatal throat wound, likely inflicted by a sharp knife, confirming what the ancient judicial papyri had long suggested. The conspiracy successfully killed the pharaoh, though the plotters were caught and executed under his successor. The pharaohs who followed faced mounting disasters on all fronts. Systematic tomb robberies became endemic across the land, with desperate bands of thieves breaking into the Valley of the Kings to loot the treasures of past pharaohs, a sacrilegious crime that would have been completely unthinkable in earlier generations. The preserved tomb robbery papyri detail extensive court investigations, confessions under torture, and trials of thieves who had stripped the royal mummies of their gold. Real power increasingly devolved away from the capital toward regional authorities as central control weakened. At the southern city of Thebes, the high priests of Amun began to function almost completely as independent rulers, controlling vast temple estates, commanding local armies, and eventually adopting royal regalia. The most prominent priest-king, Herihor, went so far as to place his name within royal cartouches, effectively declaring himself the absolute ruler of southern Egypt, while the last weak Ramesside kings maintained a nominal, fading authority from their northern palace at Pi Ramesses. By the end of the troubled reign of Ramesses XI, around 1069 years before the Common Era, Egypt had fundamentally fractured, ending the glorious New Kingdom and entering a dark era of fragmentation. Around 1069 years before the Common Era, as the final weak pharaoh of the New Kingdom officially relinquished central control, Egypt entered the Third Intermediate Period, an era that marked a dramatic reversal in governance. The nation split into distinct regions with competing centers of power. In the north, a new capital emerged at Tanis in the Nile Delta, where pharaohs of the 21st dynasty maintained the formal trappings of royal authority, but controlled only a fraction of Egypt's former territory. Meanwhile, in Thebes, the high priests of Amun established what amounted to a religious state, commanding their own independent military forces and governing the southern region with near-complete autonomy. This unusual power-sharing arrangement turned the traditional model of divine kingship upside down. The high priests controlled the vast temple estates and treasury of Amun, giving them economic leverage that consistently rivaled or exceeded that of the northern pharaohs. These priest-kings instituted their own dating systems, conducted independent foreign policy, and even adopted royal titles, all while maintaining the political fiction of loyalty to the distant Tanite kings. What made this period remarkable was the total fragmentation of power, with the country operating more like a loose confederation of allied regional states than a unified kingdom. As you listen tonight, let the centuries pass softly, and let the long, rhythmic story of the global game carry your mind into a deep and peaceful rest. Before we step completely through the heavy gates of the next chapter, and as you make yourself entirely comfortable in the quiet of the evening, take a gentle moment to dim your lights, leave a like, and subscribe to our channel. If you connect with these deep historical journeys, please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, as hearing from you is always an absolute honor. Where are you listening from tonight? And what hour of the night is it for you right now? Seeing your footsteps gather here from all corners of the world to share in these memories always brings a deep, unspeakable joy to this archive. Now, let the outside world fade into total silence, breathe deeply, and let our journey begin. Yet, throughout this political instability, Egyptian culture remained uniquely vibrant, adapting to new realities rather than disappearing. The royal necropolis at Tanis yielded extraordinary archaeological finds, including the undisturbed tomb of Pharaoh Psusennes I. Unlike the familiar golden splendor of Tutankhamun's burial, Psusennes was interred in a breathtaking inner sarcophagus crafted entirely from solid silver, a metal significantly more precious than gold in ancient Egypt due to its extreme rarity within the region's natural quarries. The political dynamic shifted again when Libyan military commanders, whose ancestors had settled in the delta as mercenaries generations earlier, seized power to establish the 22nd dynasty around 945 years before the Common Era. Shoshenq I, the dynasty's ambitious founder, managed to temporarily reunify Egypt and even launched campaigns into Israel and Judah, an event recorded in the Hebrew Bible as the sacking of Jerusalem by Shishak, king of Egypt. These Libyan pharaohs maintained traditional Egyptian court customs while distributing power through an insular, family vassal system that eventually fractured, paving the way for an even more remarkable intervention from the south. Beyond the first and second cataracts of the Nile, the ancient kingdom of Kush had absorbed Egyptian culture, writing, and religion for centuries. Around 745 years before the Common Era, as Egypt's regional princes squabbled amongst themselves, Kushite warriors marched north under King Piye, founding the 25th dynasty. Piye did not view himself as a foreign conqueror, but as a divine champion of Orthodox Egyptian religion, expressing horror at the ritual impurity of the northern rulers who had neglected the temples. The Kushites revived the construction of pyramids and launched a massive architectural renaissance, but their resurgence was cut short by the terrifying military expansion of the Assyrian Empire. Equipped with iron weapons and devastating siege engines, the Assyrians sacked Memphis in 671 before the Common Era and eventually subjected the sacred city of Thebes to a catastrophic, total plundering in 663, breaking Kushite control forever. From the ashes of Assyrian dominance, native rulers briefly reasserted independence during the 26th dynasty, known as the Sate Renaissance, establishing an era of profound cultural nostalgia where artists meticulously copied 1,000-year-old Old Kingdom reliefs to create an illusion of timeless continuity. Yet, this final native golden age was brought to an abrupt end in 525, before the Common Era, when Cambyses II led the Persian forces to victory at the Battle of Pelusium, integrating Egypt into the vast Achaemenid Empire as a tax-paying satrapy. Despite periodic bloody native rebellions over the next 2 centuries, the final native-born pharaoh, Nectanebo II, was forced to flee south, into exile, in 343, before the Common Era, as Persian armies retook the country for the final time. The arrival of Alexander the Great in 332, before the Common Era, was welcomed by the population as a liberation from Persian rule. Crowned as pharaoh in Memphis, and validated as a son of Amun by the oracle at Siwa Oasis, Alexander founded the great multicultural metropolis of Alexandria before his early death in Babylon triggered a war of succession among his top generals. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions, seized control of Egypt, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule for nearly 3 consecutive centuries. These Greek monarchs ruled as master cultural chameleons, presenting themselves as traditional pharaohs to their native subjects, while maintaining an exclusively Hellenistic court in Alexandria, building the Great Library and funding magnificent temples like Edfu and Dendera. The long dramatic ledger of pharaonic history finally culminated in the extraordinary reign of Cleopatra VII. Driven by brilliant intellectual acumen and political cunning, she mastered the native Egyptian language and leveraged alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in a desperate, final bid to protect her kingdom's sovereignty from the expanding power of Rome. Her ultimate defeat at the Battle of Actium and her subsequent suicide in 30 before the Common Era brought down the curtain on Egypt's independent existence. Augustus claimed the wealthy land as his own personal imperial domain, transforming the ancient kingdom into the primary breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Yet, as the Roman prefects took control of the ports and the ancient hieroglyphic script gradually faded from active use, the profound soul of ancient Egypt was never truly conquered. For 3,000 continuous years, this remarkably resilient civilization had adapted to floods, survived famines, absorbed invaders, and mastered foreign technologies without ever losing its core identity. Its monumental architecture, its deep understanding of universal balance, and its quiet assurance of eternity left a permanent stamp on human civilization. The pharaohs have long since vanished into the dust, and the golden crowns have been buried deep beneath the shifting sands, but the long, rhythmic echo of Egypt remains completely immortal, whispering its timeless stories to the world across the endless passage of the ages. The night has grown deep, and the ancient pages of history, from the fertile banks of the eternal Nile, must now gently close. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us tonight, journeying back through 30 centuries to listen to the distant echoes of the past. If this deep exploration of hidden history and cosmic balance has brought you peace, relaxation, and meaningful insights, please take a quiet moment to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. Your gentle presence and silent support are the greatest inspirations keeping this archive alive, allowing us to unlock new chapters of global history for you every single evening. For now, let your mind completely release the heavy worries of the day. Allow your body to rest deeply, drifting into a peaceful, serene sleep filled with beautiful dreams. Good night, and may you rest well, until we meet again on our next journey.